Good evening, everybody. We're extremely excited to have you join the 134th session of Jain Talks. In today's session, we'll be talking about the Ukraine story, and we're extremely honored to have Air Marshal Varthaman join us, as well as Anastasiia Markuts, who's an HR consultant from Ukraine, who's going to tell us about the on-the-ground experience of living through the Ukraine war. And it's my great honor now to introduce my father, Ramesh, the founder of Jain Foundation, to introduce Air Marshal Varthaman.
Thank you, Akshay. Jai Jinendra. Heroes aren't born, they are raised. Today, we have the greatest privilege to hear from and then interact with one of the most patriotic family I personally know. A dynamic woman, in fact, I'm inviting Dr. Shobhaji also, who is a part of Doctors Without Borders, a doctor who bravely works in conflicted zones, a loving wife to a war veteran, and a kind-hearted mother who raised a national hero, Abhinandan Vardhaman. Dr. Shobha has taken time out today for us from her many endeavors to share her experience of being a wife, a mother of a warring soldier. Joining her today is her loving husband, who is also a hero, a great soldier, and a brave heart father, Wing Commander Sinha Kutti Vardhaman. He is highly respected Indian Air Force pilot with a career spread over 39 years. From being a chief test pilot at AST Bangalore to commanding the MiG-21 squadron in Northeast, from his expertise on aircraft upgradation in the Kargil war to the almost warlike situation with Pakistan after infamous parliament attack, this brave heart of our soil has seen it all. Today, he is highly decorated officer who has been bestowed with many honors like Athi Visishta Seva Medal, Vayu Sena Medal, Visishta Seva Medal for Distinguished Services, and above all, the President of India awarded him the highest military peacetime award, Param Visishta Seva Medal for Distinguished Services of an exceptional order. He has taken time out for us from his busy schedule without having any airs about a last-minute invite to share his snippets of his thoughts on the current Ukraine war. When I contacted him, he shared a depth PPT on Ukraine war, which amazed me with his exclusivity. Moreover, I am thrilled to hear from a practicing Jain family about his views on something that is completely opposite to our Jain Dharma, Hinsa. Last but not the least, I would love to introduce the moderator for the evening, Akshay Shah, founder CEO of the Great Capital, who also aspired to serve the country by joining the defense, but unfortunately couldn't clear the last leg of SSB for Territorial Army. Though as a father, I must admit, I was secretly relieved. Thank you. I'll hand over to the moderator, Akshay. And Air Marshal Ji, I also forgot to tell if you can invite Madam also to be part of this session. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dad. Really, that's very kind of you. And yeah, I mean, Air Marshal Ji, do you want me to add your wife or?
No, she's attending a class at the moment. I'm sorry she cannot attend.
All right. No, sounds good. So without further ado, over to you, sir. Sir has a great presentation, so would love to hear his insights on Ukraine.
Thank you. Jai Jinendra. Mr. Ramesh, Akshay, Neil, and the members of the Jain Foundation, and my dear friends all over the world who are listening to the talk today. At the very outset, thank you very much for inviting me, and in the process educating me as well. Thank you, Mr. Ramesh. I knew quite a lot about Ukraine, but talking to an audience like this needed a little bit of a research. So it was an interesting journey. So I have put across, a whole canvas of what is happening in Ukraine, and so that thereafter, if you do read about the war that is going on there, you will be able to sort of realize what is actually the aim and objective of either sides, and of course the globe, which is having its finger in the Ukrainian affair. I'm a fighter pilot, 40 years in the Air Force, and most of my life I flew Russian-made fighter jets, and including the transport aircraft. And these aircraft were made in the USSR, designed and made in the USSR. I swore by them, I used them as a weapon, and I've been always proud of what the Soviet Union achieved. I had great friends in the Soviet Union. In fact, when I was a chief test pilot in Nasik, Ozar, I was flight testing the MiG-23s, which had come in from Russia. My neighbors were a Russian family who had come to help us at that time. The husband was from Russia, and the lady was from Ukraine. And when we were there at that time, we became very good friends. And in 1991, the Soviet Union split, and they were actually in a great deal of stress. Wife was from Ukraine, and he was from Russia. I don't know how they sorted out the years ahead, but we made lots of friends with them, and the Soviet Union, and as well as Russia now, and Ukraine has been dear friends for us, and our heart is with them. Having said that, what is happening between Russia and Ukraine is extremely sad, and it is going into a catastrophic proportions how it is affecting human life. It's so very unfortunate, and I pray that soon peace will prevail, and the determined and industrious Ukrainians will get back to their home, to their normal industrious life that they are, and have a great future ahead. Having said that, I'll just open my presentation. I'll share the screen. Is the screen visible? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's visible.
Yes, we can see your screen.
So the Ukraine story, I put it as a Ukraine story because the objective of my talk is not to be something about strategic in nature, what's happening on the battlefield. That is not my intention. And considering the audience that they are going to be hearing this talk, I thought it is better to talk about its background and how it germinated into a situation like this, and perhaps a little bit on what could happen in the future. So I'm going to go about it in that manner. And when I want to talk about these, I'll talk a little bit about the Ukraine, its turbulent history that has been there. And I know that the young lady, Anastasiia, will be able to add on to it. And ma'am, I hope to interact with you. And I really hope I can bring out what the facts are. And I'll be very happy to be corrected, of course. Then I will talk about the USSR, and that is the post-war Second World War scenario, and how NATO and Warsaw Pact came into being and what was it all about. And thereafter, I will talk about the greatest export product of Russia, oil and gas, which is funneled through Ukraine into East and West Europe. It runs the entire economy of Russia, actually. Collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, and how to bypass the land route of gas and how the Nord Stream 1 and 2 came into being, and how this Nord Stream is also one of the triggers of the situation which is happening today. And what the West did thereafter, how to bypass the Nord Stream 2, how they started the 3 Cs initiative, a brief touch on that. The Soviet Union collapsed, and so did the Warsaw Pact. But the NATO continued to expand and eastwards and gobbling up many of the countries which were originally part of the USSR. And the possible inclusion of NATO, Ukraine into NATO. And sometime in 2014, Russia moved and annexed Crimea, a touch on that, and thereafter what is happening in Donbass and why Russia is interested in the Donbass. In today's war, much of the fighting which is going on ground, but that is actually minuscule to what the media campaign is all about, trying to build up a narrative of what is actually happening in Ukraine, which is not happening in Ukraine, but it's a narrative which has been built up, which much of it could be fake. And this narrative basically is whoever speaks loudly, the other fellow is the victim. Then, of course, the two main protagonists who are involved in this, Putin and Zelensky, the human catastrophe in Ukraine. And then coming to a little bit, I'll conclude with a little bit about India, our Operation Ganga, and what role India has to play in it. Now, when we talk of the Ukrainian history, it has been turbulent. Whatever I have read, I found that it has gone through so many ups and downs, and it's because of the composition of the composition of the people, the demography of Ukraine, the religious choices in Ukraine. There has always been some kind of a turbulence in this country. When the Second World War started and the Germans marched into Russia, of course, Ukraine was on the path, and the first thing they did was cross over Ukraine, and millions of lives was lost in Ukraine and Russia. And at that time, some portions of Ukraine, the underground movement, supported the Germany and actually took part in the Holocaust in Ukraine. Almost 70,000 Jews were killed in Ukraine. The World War ended, and when the World War ended and the victors of the Second World War started sharing the spoils, the main victors of the World War II was, of course, the United States, UK, France, and Russia. And of course, the defeated party was Germany. So the nations were split, and in this split, the USSR came into being, and with Ukraine as part of the USSR. The USSR thereafter developed into a powerful communist nation, spreading fear among the West that the communism is going to spread into the West, and then there will be total destruction. So what happened was the Second World War split the countries that there were, but soon after the Second World War, the UN and everything else came into being. The world split into a bipolar world, that is the West, and then the East, which was the Soviet bloc. And this started the beginning of the Cold War, and the Cold War continued for the next 3 to 4 decades till the Soviet Union split in 1991. So in the post-war World War II, in the Paris Treaty, this is how Europe was. And the Europe at that time was split between West and East, and all the portions which are crossed here all became part of the communist bloc. The Soviet Union was this, and you can find that Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Georgia, all these countries became part of the USSR. And Poland Eastern Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Romania became part of the communist bloc. This bloc finally became what was known as the Warsaw Pact. And the West and all these countries, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Spain, Portugal, France, Italy, Belgium, Netherlands, and West Germany became became what is then called NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So we had NATO, which was formed as a defense alliance among the US and Europe, which still exists today, to defend against Warsaw Pact. So that was the aim of sorry, just a moment. That was the aim of creating the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. On the other hand, the Warsaw Pact was a defense alliance amongst the Soviet Union and its satellite governments, which I mentioned to you, which is part of Eastern Europe, which became the Warsaw Pact. The Cold War was all about NATO versus Warsaw Pact, but the whole world was in a bipolar world. So you had the United States and NATO, and you had Soviet Russia. So during the Cold War, these were the countries which were part of the Warsaw Pact. You can see from East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, and the whole of the Soviet Union. All this in green were, including Turkey, were part of the Warsaw Pact. And you'll find that there are actually three countries, Switzerland, Austria, and Yugoslavia, which remain non-aligned. In fact, many of you will remember Yugoslavia because it was among the non-aligned nations that time under President Tito and our Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, who formed the non-aligned nations. And the Cold War ended. And when the Cold War ended, it happened when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. And the nations, the portions which were part of the USSR split into many countries, which was called the Commonwealth of Independent States. And these, some of the important countries were Belarus, the Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Turkmenistan. This is Central Asia, actually, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. So all these portions of the Soviet Russia split into this separate independent countries. At that time in 1991, the understanding with the West was that since the Soviet Union has collapsed, Warsaw Pact became defunct. So Warsaw Pact did not exist anymore. So the Russia's understanding and the discussions with the United States was such that since Warsaw Pact does not exist anymore, what is the need to have NATO? But NATO continued to exist. And NATO, though formed in 1948, continued to expand. Originally, it was just in 1949. There were very few countries. In the 1950s, there were 14 countries. Today, NATO has continued to expand. In 2004, they added more countries. In 2017, they added some more countries. And today, there are current aspirations to join NATO, one of which is Ukraine. And the cause of the war is all because of Ukraine wanting to join NATO. Now, NATO, from a group of 14 countries, has expanded to 30 countries. So Putin asked them, if you have created a huge military bloc called NATO, who is your target? Who is your enemy? Obviously, there are no enemies other than Russia, which is there. So Putin kept saying that the expansion of NATO eastwards should not happen. So much as the United States agreed to it, in fact, today they do not agree to it, but there are enough cables indicating and the files that indicate that NATO had actually agreed to it. But NATO expanded continuously and became all these portions which got absorbed into NATO. And this has been the singular reason for the catastrophe which is happening in Ukraine. Now, one of the main export earnings for Russia has been its oil and gas. And this has been ever since the Second World War. And the oil and gas produced in Russia feeds initially into Central, or what we call Eastern Europe, and thereafter continue to expand into Western Europe. Over a period of time, the complete Western Europe started heavily depending on this oil and gas. So these oil and gas gas was supplied to Eastern Europe and Western Europe through huge number of pipelines which were running over the land. You can find the number of pipelines which were running and was initially feeding Eastern Europe and then went on to feed Western Europe. And this was the major commercial export of Russia, and it was the lifeline for Europe as a whole. Now, over a period of time, it was Russia soon realized, once 1991 and the Soviet Union split up, it was very, very apparent that all these pipelines were being funneled through Ukraine. And these are the pipelines you can see in red, which were going into Italy, Germany, Austria, to Poland, to Belarus. All of them were being funneled through Ukraine into Eastern and finally into Western Europe. And this was another problem which happened. And there was always, and for Ukraine, this was a money earning proposition, because the Russians had to pay for the oil and gas which were being transited through Ukraine, and it became a major earner for Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine was industrially developed and was the granary of Europe, supplying much of the food grains for Europe. It was industrially advanced, and like I said, I flew the AN-32s, what they call the Antonov, and the Illusion. At least the Antonov factory is in Ukraine. Many of our combat aircraft avionic systems are manufactured in Ukraine. So Ukraine had all these technological advances besides earning from these pipelines which were running through Ukraine. So when you see the gas imports from Russia, these are the gas pipelines which are coming in, and all of them were being funneled through Ukraine and into all these countries. So this was, let me say, a burning issue between Russia and Ukraine. There were continuous negotiations and the prices were increased continuously. Now, to avoid this gas flowing through Ukraine, Russia went about developing something called the Nord Stream. And the Nord Stream was undersea pipelines running through the Baltic Sea. From two ports near St. Petersburg, these oil pipelines are undersea pipelines going straight into Germany, into a city called Lubmin in Germany. Now, when it ran under the sea, it did not have to run through Ukraine. So Ukraine started to gradually lose money because quite a portion of the gas was flowing under the sea, bypassing Ukraine. And the Western Europe was very happy with it because it was a secure way of pumping gas into Western Europe, and everybody was happy except for Ukraine. Now, the Nord Stream 1 came into being sometime in 2004, and it has been pumping gas all this while. And this Nord Stream 1 was actually shared, the expenditure on which was in billions of dollars was shared between Germany and Russia. They pooled in the money to make this. To double the supply of gas into Western Europe, Russia invested in Nord Stream 2. And this pipeline, which starts from this location and goes to Germany here, runs parallel to the existing Nord Stream 1, which will double the amount of gas that flows from Russia into Germany. So, but this Nord Stream 2 was ready since last year, September. It's been ready for the last 4 to 5 months. And it is just waiting for certification and commissioning so that the gas can be pumped. And if you, when you, see a bit of the history of the last 1 month or 1.5 months, you would have found a very reluctant Germany, which was not willing to arm Ukraine. Whereas everybody else was arming Ukraine, Germany sent only helmets to Ukraine. It was reluctant. It was reluctant basically because it did not want to compromise Nord Stream 2. It wanted Nord Stream 2 to function. Finally, the Americans have managed to, play around with Germany. And as soon as the war began, Germany walked out of Nord Stream 2. So Nord Stream 2 lies unutilized for the time being. So the whole idea was for the, especially for the United States. You see, as far as the United States was concerned, this Russian oil and gas was making Russia rich. And if Russia became rich, the concept of unipolar world where America is the only sole superpower on the planet will get compromised. So the whole aim was to make sure Russia is under sanctions, Russia does not export oil and gas, and with these sanctions, the Russian economy crashes, and the threat of Russia disappears. That is one. And the second aspect was to pump oil from the United States by ships, of course, in the liquid natural gas, LNG, into Western Europe. So America continues to, today the gas production in America is so huge, thanks to the shale gas which is being produced, that they can supply whatever is required for Western Europe from America. And this makes America richer and richer, while Russia gets poorer and poorer. So what the West did was to stop this oil and gas supply from Russia into East and West Europe by something called 3 Seas Initiative. Basically, what is this 3 Seas Initiative? The 3 Seas were connecting the Baltic Sea, the Adriatic Sea, and the Black Sea, the 3 seas, and running pipelines right across north and south this way. So you have a pipeline like this and pipeline like this. So the ships come in from the United States, pump oil into the LNG terminal here, and pump oil into the LNG terminals here. And these LNG, the gas, are pumped into Europe, and the 3 Seas Initiative becomes what you call a super alternative to the Nord Stream 1 and 2. So basically, this was the aim of the West, trying to cut out Russia from this gas and oil pipelines. So as I said, the NATO continued to expand, and Russia continuously protested. So as and when the countries started joining one by one, the Russians said, you said you will not move east. Why are you moving east? And they kept protesting. NATO continued to expand and ignored all the protests from Russia, till finally it came to Ukraine. When Ukraine was given the feed that, we will consider you to join NATO, the Ukrainians looked at it as a very good opportunity. And Ukraine thought that I can become more part of West Europe and get into the security umbrella of NATO, and NATO will continue to protect me. Actually speaking, NATO and the US actually made Ukraine walk up the garden path and did not fulfill the promises which were given to Ukraine. So Ukraine, with the confidence that they are going to future join to NATO, decided that they will join European Union and that they will join NATO. Russia protested again, and the impending war, and Russia mobilized immediately and started to expand brought its forces surrounding Ukraine. But NATO never said that Ukraine, we will not take them into NATO. And NATO persisted that don't worry, we are here, we will protect you. For Russia, there were basically two problems. First and foremost, its major naval fleet was based in Sevastopol here, in the Crimean Peninsula. It's a huge port called Sevastopol, where the Russian fleet was parked. And the rest of the Navy was in the Baltic Sea. So in case you wanted to come into the Mediterranean or into the Black Sea, from all around, enter the Straits of Gibraltar, get into the Mediterranean Sea, and come here. This was a very, very long route. And by the time the Russian Navy could come into the Black Sea, the war would have been over a month ago. So as far as Russia was concerned, they had to take Sevastopol, that is in Crimea. So what Russia did was, in 2014, it annexed Crimea. Now, there is a lot of discussion on Crimea. Actually speaking, Crimea has been part of Russia since the late 1800s, has been part of Russia. In the USSR, during the tenure of Khrushchev handed over Crimea to Ukraine to govern. See, Ukraine was part of Russia, USSR, of course. So Khrushchev handed over Crimea to Ukraine for better administrative governance. So therefore, when Ukraine split into an independent country, ideally, Crimea should have gone to Russia, which it didn't happen. And there was an understanding between Ukraine and Russia that both will use the port of Sevastopol, which is here. When they saw Ukraine being very partial to NATO, wanting to join NATO, Russia could not take this instability. They went and occupied Crimea in 2014. And today, Crimea belongs to Russia. The West went and put in sanctions against Russia, and the sanctions exist till today. The other region, which is the Donbas region, which is here, which is the region of conflict. And in fact, the Russians have gone past the Donbas region, and the Russian army is very close to Kyiv at the moment. This Donbas region has a majority population of Russians, and it was part of Ukraine. And ever since the split and they became part of Ukraine, there has been continuous instability, and over 20,000 people in the Donbas region have died, have been killed in this conflict. And as far as Russia is concerned, Russia wants to take over this Donbas region and make them separate republics, two separate republics. And once that happens, Russia's intention is to make a land connectivity from Donbas into Crimea. Otherwise, the only connectivity to Crimea is by crossing the Black Sea out here. You know, you have to cross the Black Sea. So basically, they want to create a land route into Crimea. So here is the port of Sevastopol, where today the Russian Navy is embarked, and they control the Black Sea area, and they're able to manage the region, Europe comfortably, and of course they have access to the Mediterranean Sea. This is the Sea of Azov, and the Sea of Azov separates Russia from Crimea, and this is the portion they want to occupy so that there is a land route into Crimea. From Sevastopol into Black Sea, you go through the Straits of Istanbul, and that is the axis for major navies that go up and down the Black Sea, and you can see naval warship sailing through the Straits of Istanbul. The Donbas region I just spoke about, there basically are two separate Luhansk and Donetsk, and the Russians want them to be separate, two separate republics, which of course will remain under Russian control, and that sorts out many of the issues which Russia perceives. Now, like I said, the ground operations and the air operations or war, or the actual military operations in one aspect. But wars are not fought just on ground. Wars are fought and won by narrative. The media controls the narrative. And it is this narrative which goes across the world, which will tell who is a villain and who is a friend, and what the story is all about, and put a narrative which is partial to one side's thinking. And today, the media is actually controlling the war and is projecting to all of us in our rooms, in our WhatsApp, in our news time. And actually speaking, not much is known of what is happening. And so this building the narrative is what this present Ukraine war is about. So actually speaking, what the truth is, we really don't know. I suppose Anastasiia will be able to fill us on this. So if some of you are James Bond fans and have seen this movie called Tomorrow Never Dies, and you will find how media intends to control the narrative. In fact, the news is already ready to be released because the destruction is going to happen tomorrow. And the moment the destruction happens, the news comes out. It's already ready, made, recorded, and kept waiting to launch the news. And this is what the villain in Tomorrow Never Dies. There is no news like bad news. So you can spread all amount of bad news, and actually military warfare comes second to media warfare. And so here are some examples of the narrative and the fake news which are all over the world. You'll find this is been a Ukrainian child which is actually going through the ruins of a bombing campaign. Unfortunately, it is not so. It is from actually a music video. And here they're saying the Russian planes are bombing Ukraine. This is actually the fly past in an air show in Russia. It's an old picture. And here is another old video, which actually does not belong to Russia. It actually belongs to something in the Lebanese area. But these were shown, the bombing operations in what's happening in Ukraine. So one has to be very selective on what is actually the truth and what is the narrative which are being spread. So if you want to know the truth, you must know both sides of the story. You get to hear only the West story in this particular case. Russian story does not come out. So much of it is fake news.
Marshal, just if I could just jump in there. Anastasiia has just joined us, and maybe I could just do a quick introduction of her, and then post that you could do your
I'll stop. Okay, you'll stop share. Okay.
No, perfect. I'll just quickly introduce her, and then you can continue with your presentation, Marshal, and then we can move on to her part. But I thought I'd take the opportunity to introduce her.
Please.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Anastasiia, for joining us. I think it's extremely important that we hear firsthand accounts of what's actually happening on the ground in Ukraine. So Anastasiia is a HR business partner at an international technology company, which has a major branch in Kyiv. She has over 20 years of experience in the field and has also been an entrepreneur, as well as occupied a number of positions in management, marketing, and so on. She's an alum of the International Christian University in Kyiv with a degree in business administration. She's currently in Poland after fleeing Ukraine with her 2 children, aged 11 and 9, and their pet dog. Anastasiia is also heavily involved in the company's evacuation efforts to support fellow Ukrainians. Anastasiia, we also have retired Air Marshal Varthaman from the Indian Armed Forces, Indian Air Force, who's kind of just given us the background of kind of the history of Ukraine and all of the things that are at play. So he's in the fag end of his presentation. So maybe we can just give him maybe another 5 to 8 minutes to conclude his presentation, and then we'd love to hear your first-hand account.
Thank you for welcoming me. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Now, can you see my slide?
Yes, we can see it. We can see it.
Okay, I'll just go down to where I was. Anastasiia, good evening. I guess you missed a large part of my presentation. Very happy to see you, and I hope you reunite with your family. Peace prevails, peace comes back to your country, and so does prosperity. I wish you the very best. I was just telling at the beginning of my talk that all my life I flew Soviet airplanes as a fighter pilot, and I flew many of your transport aircraft. And these transport aircraft were made in Ukraine. And when I was a chief test pilot at a specialist base, our neighbors were Russians. And in fact, my closest neighbor was a Russian couple. The gentleman was from Russia, and his wife was from Ukraine. And this was 1991 when the Soviet Union split, and the rest of course, his history. But they were very dear friends, and I have lots of friends in Russia and Ukraine, and they are very dear to us. So I'll continue with my presentation. So we came to the United Nations. So we have reached a situation where United Nations has almost become irrelevant. I mean, the United Nations can say anything. The countries do exactly what is good for their own country. And sometime in 1989, in fact, before the Soviet Union split, when Ronald Reagan was the president, he made a statement. The founders of the United Nations sought to replace a world at war with a world of civilized order. They hoped that a world of relentless conflict would give way to a new era, one where freedom from violence prevailed. But the awful truth is that the use of violence for political gain has become more, not less, widespread in the last decade. Now he's talking of 1980s. And after his reign, we have had the Gulf Wars, and we have had so many wars. The wars in Afghanistan, the war in Libya, and you name it. And today we have the war in Ukraine. It's only got from bad to worse. And the relevance of the United Nations is being questioned in every forum. And many say it's irrelevant because basically, you know, to put it very crudely, it's more like a toothless tiger. Now, because of all these things, look at the tragedy which is happening. So when the Gulf Wars were going on, and so was the war in Afghanistan for almost 2 decades, and then, of course, Syria and Iran and Iraq, and the problems in Turkey out here. Then, of course, the Libyan war, the Sudanese war, the Ethiopia, Somalia. You found that the refugees were heading to Western Europe, hoping that they will find some peace and stability in Europe. And this was the path the refugees took into Italy, crossing the Mediterranean, or through the land route into Greece, and thereafter into Central and Western Europe. But today, the tragedy is we are seeing a reverse flow of refugees from Ukraine into Poland, to the Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania, Moldova. And to the last count, I was told almost 2 million refugees have crossed over from Ukraine into the neighboring countries. This is the tragedy of the world, and it's the making of mankind, and how it can create a total disaster to families and their livelihood. There are 2 antagonists in this. One is, of course, Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and the other one is Putin, the president of Russia. Now, these 2 are contrasts in many parts. Putin has been ruling for almost 2 decades. He's from the spy agency. He's a strategist, and he has been single-handedly pursuing to get Russia back to its powerful status and regain its glory. So he's got a strategy in mind, and he's effective. He's a keen planner, and very ruthless in the manner he goes about. On the other hand, Zelensky, a comedian who has come into politics in the last few years, and what do I say? Not really realize the potential of Russia, and how, to a very large extent, he has compromised the people of Ukraine and his country. He should have realized that NATO is not going to fight his war, and NATO has completely let him down, pumped weapons into Ukraine and told Ukraine to fight on its own, which is a tragedy. And despite the NATO having a $1 trillion defense budget and Russia having a $20 billion budget, Russia is like a, Goliath, conquering Ukraine. So Ukraine was left alone to the mercy of the Russians. The NATO actually has dumped him. In fact, he even asked that at least create a no-fly zone over my country, which will protect me. And you can shoot down any of the aircraft, which even that the NATO did not agree, and they had their own reasons for not accepting a no-fly zone. So actually speaking, Zelensky has been led up the garden path by the West, and in the bargain, he has created havoc on his own country and his population, and only history will tell, will evaluate him in the years to come. He's put up a very brave front, and he's taken on every challenge. He's motivated his troops, but that's not going to work against a massive army with no help from anybody else. Now, when you see Europe, and I keep saying that I've lived 3 years in Europe, I have seen that Europe is persistently war with itself. I don't think they have a decade with no war at all. And history will tell you, if you go back and just read about Europe, they are constantly fighting. And much as they say that they are advanced and they are, third world nation and they are very civilized, I think the rest of the continents are far more peaceful and live in harmony when you compare to Europe. You look at World War II. Look at actually who won. Almost 80 million died. That is 8 crores. Russia lost 26 million. Poland lost 6 million. China lost 20 million. All created on the continent of Europe. The war started in Europe with Germany. Even India fought this war, and we lost 3.7 million. The USA financed this war and produced most of the war materials. It gained the most. It has been a wartime economy ever since. And in my perception, I always keep saying the same thing, that the United States cannot afford a world living in peace. They will collapse. And this wartime economy has to be nurtured continuously. If you look at World War I, 22 million dead, 23 million wounded. India lost 70,000. So Europe has been constantly at war. And soon after World War II, there was the war in Yugoslavia, where the whole of NATO bombed Yugoslavia for almost 40 days. There was Kosovo, there was Serbia, there were killing of people, there were murder between the Christians and Muslims. They are constantly at war. And today you can see what's happening in Ukraine. So the fulcrum is Europe, which spreads this war to other areas. And there is a threat of nuclear war now. And when the nuclear war happens, it affects everybody else. So what happens to India? I think to a very, very large extent, India has gone through this war tactfully, diplomatically, of course, like every nation on this planet does, looks after its primary interest and looks for peace and harmony around the world. And I think to a very large extent, we have played. We have interest in Russia. We have interest in Ukraine. They are the suppliers of large number of our industry, including the weapons that we use. And of course, we have the United States on whom we depend as well. So it was quite a bit of a tightrope walk, but we have tactfully navigated through this war. And we gradually realized that we are an important nation, and when we have reached a level where the whole world is interested, what is India's opinion? Once upon a time, we really, our opinion did not matter. It was almost like a land of elephants and snakes. But today, what India's opinion are, where India votes, what does India do, does India abstain, it concerns the whole planet. We really have arrived, unfortunately, at the loss of what's happening to the citizens of Europe. One of the success stories of India in the last 20 years, or let's say 25 years, has been how we have looked after our nationals all over the world. Wherever you are, our Indians, the Indian government will get you back if you are in crisis. And we have proved it time and again. From the time Saddam Hussein invaded the UAE, we evacuated 120,000 Indians from the UAE to Yemen, to all countries, all over the planet. We have got back our Indians safe home. And we have proved it time and again. And this Operation Ganga, we have finally rescued almost 20,000 Indians who had made home in Ukraine. Many of our students who were living and studying in Ukraine, we have rescued all of them. And that was thanks to our own private airlines and the Indian Air Force, which went in. We brought everyone back safe. We unfortunately lost one student. I think this is a remarkable achievement of this country. In fact, other countries have been telling us, please rescue our citizens, and which we have always, agreed, and we have rescued Pakistanis, we have rescued Bangladeshis, we have rescued people from all over into this. In fact, the strength and the say of our Prime Minister Modi is so strong, he even stopped the war for a short while so that our students can be moved safely through the war zone. So that is the strength of India. That's the strength of our diplomacy, and that's the strength of our nation today. And today we have become a global player. We have constantly said in the UN that we want peace and harmony. Please get back to the table, stop the war. We don't take sides. We said we want both of you, please stop the war, come back to the table, and make peace and stability your prime interest. While we have do not compromise the interests of our nation. Of course, we have political interests which compromise our nation sometimes, and only to many of the students who have returned from Ukraine, all I need to say is have confidence in your country. We'll bring you back home, and we'll bring you back safe. We lost one student, but we brought the rest of you back home. And that's my presentation. Thank you very much for your patient hearing. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, Marshal. That was extremely comprehensive and gave us a tremendous amount of context about the current Ukrainian crisis, and particularly from an Indian lens. Thank you so much. And now over to you, Anastasiia. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your experience? Just for context, this is a platform that has viewers from across South Asia, and also some viewers from America and also other parts of the world. And they would love to hear about your perspective and experience.
Well, first of all, I probably will tell you my personal story in this situation and what is happening, and then I'm open to questions. And I can, of course, share my opinion, but it's my private opinion as a private person and as a Ukrainian citizen. So I work, as it has been mentioned, I work as an HR for a large company. We had several hundred people in our Kyiv office, and the company has been operating in Kyiv for decades, and it's an international company for investment. So we have been receiving news in our press. Foremost, the news were coming from the US that Russia might attack Ukraine, and the news started in around November, December last year, and they intensified in January. So we were receiving a lot of news that prepare for the war. There is a large-scale attack, large-scale war coming up from Russia towards Ukraine. Of course, we discussed it at the management meetings, and of course, we wanted to look at it in terms of business continuity. However, it was difficult to believe that in the 21st century, a war can happen on schedule. That, you know, basically our partners in the US, they were going as far as actually naming some dates. And it really seemed hard to believe that on February 20-something, a war can start. We were just saying that probably it is an information war. So indeed, us and many other IT and technology companies with whom we were in touch, they were preparing for a number of scenarios. Of course, we realized there are 1,000 scenarios possible or so, but we prepared to basic three. One would be that it's all of this is just an information war that is happening, and we're in between of this. The second scenario was that there would be some limited attacks. So for instance, in Donbass, in Crimea, in the territories of Ukraine that are already occupied by Russia, there would be some intensification of action, or even some fire, or maybe they would want to increase the territory a bit. And the third scenario was actually a large-scale conflict or large-scale war. And when we started talking about it, we just couldn't emotionally go into much detail because it seemed too improbable, even though we prepared to all three. And at some point at the end of January, it became so difficult to be living in all of this information field where we were actually attacked by the news and the press, that I remember waking up at 5 a.m., checking the news, has the bomb been started? Not yet, and then sleeping for 2 more hours to go to work. So it was actually, the level of anxiety in the society was increasing, even though some people were, of course, very calm, saying that nothing is going to happen, don't believe all of this. Having read all this news, I made a proactive decision to take my children and go to the western part of Ukraine 2 weeks before the actual campaign started, just in case. So I had the opportunity to stay there, and I decided just to be on the safe side. I took the children and we went to Lviv in the west part of the country, close to Poland, 2 weeks before the war. And then eventually on February 24, I received a call from a friend at 5 a.m. saying that the bombardment has started. And of course, it was very hard to believe. So in Lviv, we got the sirens for the air attacks next day, and people had to start hiding. So basically you had to hide during the day and during the night and during the day and during the night. And at the end, you just ended up going between your home and the basement. So this is how the life looked like. At some point, of course, it was difficult to understand what will be happening in Ukraine, how far will the Russians progress. So my family and I made the decision we're going to move out of the country, at least temporarily, and be on the safe side. So we tried to drive out through the Polish border, but the borders were so occupied. It took from 60 to 72 hours of cars standing in line. The line spread kilometers from the border. There was no food or water. So families evacuating with children, it was very difficult to bear. So we went down to the Slovakian border. There were lines as well. And then we went down further to the Hungarian border. And we eventually managed to pass through Hungary. And then going up through Hungary, we stayed a couple of days. We were able to sleep, and then we're driven up to Poland, and this is where my family and I are currently. Looking at the situation from inside being Ukrainian, of course, the heart breaks, because every news that you see, I also see, and I know these streets. These are the streets where my people walked there. They ate ice cream there. You know, this is where my family lived. This is where I have the house. and things like that. This is there. We have friends and relatives. So of course, this is heartbreaking, and we track very closely where our employees are for the company, where our friends are, and whether they've been able to get out. Because in some parts of Kiev, people were blocked by the Russian army. They were in the basements for like a week or so, without electricity, often without food or water. So the situation there was getting close to humanitarian crisis. And of course, we see more and more, on one hand, indeed, as it was presented, it's also about information war, and even now how the events are pictured. But it looks like the Russian army has bombarded most of Ukraine. There are some parts that are not affected yet, but when you look at the map of Ukraine, where the marks where there was some fire, it looks like you know, a face of a child with the kid's disease. That, you know, everywhere you have the marks on the map, it's all affected. People suffer, children suffer. Children and pregnant women have been killed. Women have been raped. I'm sorry to mention that. This is like, from what we see, it's a war without any rules, unfortunately. Human corridors, the green corridors for people to evacuate, are constantly being attacked and shot. Kids have been killed trying to evacuate. So it is really hard to imagine that we can have the situation in the year that we live in now. And I will stop here, and I'm open to questions, and of course ready to again share my personal perspective on what is happening.
No, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's incredibly heartbreaking. I'm so sorry that you have to kind of experience that and kind of live through that experience. Marshal, wanted to first give you the opportunity to ask any questions that you had of Anastasiia, or if not, I'm happy to. I'm also happy to ask.
No, I have none, but I hope you know, there's a better tomorrow. That's all I can wish for Anastasiia.
Thank you.
So Anastasiia, how do you see this playing out, right? Do you see that there might be a ceasefire soon? Do you see a regime change and people returning back to Ukraine, or how do you see it playing out?
That is the hardest question, and we discuss it also within friends, colleagues, and you know, because once, and again, I want to be clear, because in the world press, this situation is often called like a conflict. It is actually a war, and we prefer it to be called a war because this is what it is. We have tanks on our territory, we have ships, we have military airplanes, we have, you know, all sorts of military men, and it is a full-scale war. It is not just a situation. And how do you end the war? Once you have created such a big mess in the middle of Europe, then, you know, what's the end? Do you just say, I was sorry, this was all a mistake, or because you've already went too far, you know, President Putin and the Russian army has went too far. And the feelings, for instance, I'm an ethnic Russian, but I'm a citizen of Ukraine. All my grandparents have come from Russia, but I've been born and raised in Ukraine and have Ukrainian passport, and I consider myself to be a full Ukrainian because this is my homeland, my country where I've been raised, and the country that's given me education, everything I have so far. So how to end this war is a big question. They are currently in talks, they're in negotiations, but originally this is a win-lose situation. You know, somebody's attacking you and you are defending. And what do you talk about? What can you talk about? Of course, we want them to stop attacking us and go back to their country, and ideally provide us some repairs, you know, some money to deal with the big mess they've created, because more than 200 schools have been ruined. You know, my children used to go to school. Where do they go to school now if their school has been bombed? You know, hospitals, even hospitals for mentally sick people are being attacked. You know, what is that? What kind of a war is that? So of course we want them to go back and to stop this immediately and to cease fire, but apparently they don't want to do it. And in our press, we have big discussions about what is the purpose of President Putin. What does he actually want to achieve with this war? And it looks like the commanders and the military commanders who are observing this, they're saying that it looks like he doesn't have a stable interest. So he was pursuing some interests, and then depending on how the situation develops, he's changing his mind. And therefore, it is very difficult to follow, because so far we haven't, none of us have understood what his actual purpose is and what he wants to achieve with this. It, of course, may be a conflict of larger forces. It is not just about Ukraine and Russia, because historically neighboring countries always have some issues, in relations. It's like brothers living together, sisters living together, they always have some tensions. Even psychologists tell you that it's not easy. Siblings relationships are the most hard in psychology, some psychologists say. But of course, this conflict could be rather about world's larger forces fighting just on our territory. It could be about large economics and large money, again, with like oil and gas issues involved. It is hard for us to comment on that, because at the moment, we're just trying to save the lives of our people. It is about human life for Ukraine at the moment. Because, for instance, I can tell you about my colleagues. We have a couple dozen colleagues that have been mobilized. And of course, we try to ensure that they are safe in life, first of all. And the people who are still in hot and risky territories are evacuated to a safe place.
No, thank you for that. I think, like you mentioned, it is all about life and people at this point. What's the sentiment amongst the Ukrainians and even the ones that were fleeing? One of the panelists have asked, what's the sentiment? Are they how do they view the Ukrainian president and his role? And would love to hear your perspective on that.
At the moment, I personally and the people I know think that he is doing everything he can to be. It's tremendous pressure to be president of Ukraine at this point in time. And to hold your borders and to fight with whatever means you have, to fight back, to defend. So at the moment, the sentiment is very positive. People support Zelensky, even the skeptics who thought that a comedian cannot run a country. We think, we really believe he's doing the best he can at the moment. So the sentiment is very much for support of what he's doing in his actions.
And are you disappointed with NATO for not helping enough or for not stepping in? I think that's something that Air Marshal also mentioned.
It is indeed that has been mentioned that it is unfortunate. It is unfortunate that NATO cannot interfere, because the tagline from the Ukrainian society has been that we can fight on the ground. Our men are mobilized. They are ready to fight. We have some of them have been trained since the last conflict in 2014. So our army is in much better shape than it was in 2014. And people are actually fighting on the ground. They are sacrificing their bodies, their life to defend their land. Some of the people that even my colleagues who are mobilized, they say, this is my land. There's nowhere I will go from here. I will fight and defend it till the end. However, the Russian army is attacking us on the ground and from the sea and from the air. And from the air, we are not, like the country of Israel, we don't have the ceiling to protect ourselves from the air missiles, air attacks, as well as some, countries can do that. So basically, we are unprotected from the sky. And once they're offensive from the sky and on the ground, it becomes too much. We just cannot, it's difficult to cope with it. I mean, we've been managing somehow, for 15 days, but it is definitely difficult. So we have been campaigning and asking for NATO to close our sky, which actually means patrolling the sky with military airplanes and shooting down all the Russian airplanes that come by. However, NATO said that they can't defend, because of course, for them, that would mean a military conflict with Russia. And that for all of us would mean something much larger than just a conflict or a war in Ukraine. So we are disappointed with NATO, but we understand that, we are not part of NATO, and we understand the reasoning behind them. But of course, our feelings are affected, and we, of course, this is not what we've hoped for, because there was a massive campaign in Ukraine asking NATO to close the sky, and it didn't happen.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. The other question that that we had was there actually a big desire for Ukrainian citizens to join NATO before last year? Because a lot of the narrative that exists is that the reason for the war is that Ukraine wanted to join NATO, and that was the context for the beginning of the war.
Since Ukraine became independent in 1999 and 1991, we wanted, eventually the course of the country was pro-European. So we always wanted to join the EU and we wanted to join NATO. There were some talks on NATO, but rather the society was pro-joining NATO. So the social polls tell us that most Ukrainians support joining the EU and NATO. I think that President Putin and the Russian military commanders, they used this sort of NATO narrative as a part indeed of their story on the reasoning why they're attacking Ukraine. But, you know, it's like we haven't done any steps and NATO hasn't invited us yet. We're not there yet. We're not even close to joining NATO. And therefore, why attack us now? So I think they had some own plan and agenda on their mind, and they wanted to come up with some reasons why they want to attack us. It is an agenda that unfortunately we can't comment on or follow because it's their agenda and it's been formed throughout the decades, I think, and the last years especially. So we know for sure at the moment that the Russians have been preparing this war for quite some time. From what we read in the press, our army has been able to get a hold of some papers together with the Russian prisoners, that there were some decrees signed on January 18 of actually launching this full-scale war in Ukraine. So it's been decided. And again, there are a lot of lies saying that even before the February, when the actual campaign started in February, President Putin and the Russian officials, they've been saying, we do not want a war, we do not plan to war. And there were some people referring to, unfortunately, Hitler, saying that before the Second World War, Hitler was also saying, we will not have a war, we don't want a war, nothing will happen, and then it started. So up till the last moment, the news coming from Russia was saying that there will be no war, we will not attack. But in fact, they were training their military, they were preparing, they were at our borders very ready to start. And this is what also prisoners confirm. This has been known, planned, the dates were known, and this was not a surprise, at least for the people involved from the Russian side of what has happened. And again, NATO was just, I think, a tagline in the story of why, because they needed to explain somehow why they're attacking us now.
No, makes sense. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that provides some very helpful context. I'm just going to ask one last question before I think there are a couple of questions from the audience members for Air Marshal, which I'm going to switch back to after this question, and we might come back to you. Is what message would you have for us, right? Ours is a platform that is religious in some respects, because ours is the Jain religion, which believes in nonviolence, and a lot of our audience members are based in India, and some across the world as well, America and so on. What message would you have for us? What would you like us to do? Would be a question that we'd love to get your thoughts on.
I would say that Ukraine needs support, and if you're in any position to help, that your state, whatever financial, religious allows, then please help in that way. Whether it is supporting us in a diplomatic way, whether it is supporting us with if it's again allowed to you with any like there are foreign military men, for instance, now fighting, volunteers fighting in Ukraine. If it is hosting Ukrainian families that flee, that there might be some, because they flee all over the world now, hosting families from Ukraine, or whether it's donating to organizations that host Ukrainian refugees, because a lot of people, a lot of families, a lot of souls are affected at the moment, and some people are in a very bad psychological state because they're shocked, they're lost, they are I deal with, as an HR, I deal with these cases day to day, that people really cannot take this. They really don't believe this is happening, and they really need support in any way you people can provide it to our people. It's human to human support that is needed.
Thank you so much for sharing that. If there's any a link or something that you'd like to circulate, we'd be happy to circulate that amongst our membership. So please do share with us, and we'll pass that on. Marshal, I think we had a question from one of the audience members from like a military perspective, and given your understanding of military history, how do you think the war is going to play out, and what would be the end state?
What I see now, I think there's already a bit of a softening. The very first, can you hear me? You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. I can see a bit of softening already. There are two reasons why I say it. One was, of course, President Zelensky saying that he's no more interested in joining NATO. He said it about, I think, 3 days ago, because he is a disillusioned man, and NATO has actually let down the country. And he has said that, I'm not interested anymore, number one. And that was one of the reasons why Putin was, his intention to attack Ukraine. The second thing was, which came out in the press today, was that Putin made a statement that in the discussions which are happening in Turkey, as you know, Turkey has organized a meeting between the foreign ministers of Ukraine and Russia. This is currently ongoing in Turkey, hosted by the government of Turkey, in which, after which, actually, Putin has made a statement that, there is a bit of understanding. We are making progress. You see, these are indications, I would say, towards somewhere reaching some idea of, stopping the war. As far as Putin is concerned, what I feel, because I really can't understand why he invaded, is that he has to make sure Ukraine never joins NATO, which I think he has completely achieved. The second thing was to make these Donbas regions as two independent republics, which I think he has almost achieved. The third was, I guess, to have a land link to the Crimean Peninsula. So I think these were his aims. Whether a military invasion was necessary to do this, that I really cannot comment upon. But I think with these things having been achieved, he will be able to, I think there could be, the war fading out soon. None of them can carry on for a war like this for so long, because to sustain a military operation with long logistic lines through Ukraine, you can imagine Kyiv is so far deep into Ukraine, far from the Russian border. The logistical, that is the tail, is so long. Every day it has a huge economic impact. So you can't sustain the war. And the second thing is the onset of spring. And the Ukrainian spring is almost at the doorstep, and already the snow has started to melt. And with the snow melting, the tanks are getting bogged down. You have to stick yourself on the main, roads. The moment you follow on the main roads, you become a target to the Ukrainian army. So things will start going against Putin if he continues this campaign in a longer period. It will not be sustainable.
Thank you for that, Dr. Marshal Varthaman. I think we have a request from some of the audience members as well as my father. Is your wife back? We'd love to have her briefly on the session as well as share her views in case she's available.
She's still in her class. She's one very
that makes sense.
persistent student.
So with that, I think we'll just go with the last question, because I know we have a hard stop with another programming event at 8:30. The last two questions are, one is Putin an erratic leader? Is a question that maybe either one of you could answer. It is something that's come up amongst the audience questions. And the second is, what's the logic of targeting civilians in residential areas and hospitals and public spaces? And does it not bother like humanity that is the case? And why does that happen? And how do we deal with that is a question that's also been asked by Miss Nina out there in the chat.
Anastasiia, would you like to answer? Then I can take on.
Is Putin an erratic leader? From what I know, in the US, the military analysts try to analyze whether he is actually mentally healthy. And the conclusion, at least their conclusion, I can only judge from what I read in the press, was that he is mentally healthy. He knows what he's doing. Is he erratic? Probably. I would say that, as an HR, also having some psychological background, I would say that the human psychic, and whoever you are, if you're just a private person or a world leader, you have your psychic and you have your private story and your life story. So probably he has something in him that is driving him, to be doing this, like internally, even as a private person, not just a president. Would I consider him erratic? Probably yes, I would. And the fact that the Russian army is attacking civil objects and civil, civil citizens and civil objects. Just a few days ago in Mariupol, they have bombarded very heavily a children's hospital and a maternity center. And their narrative was that all the pregnant women have been evacuated and this birthing center has been occupied by the Ukrainian army. Therefore, they considered it to be a military object. And all the photos of pregnant women almost, giving birth with huge bellies, this was all just, made up by our media. Which, from what I know from people, because I have former colleagues from Mariupol, which I know this is not the case. There were still, some people have been evacuated, but there were some still civilian people left, and it was not a military base. So it is really hard to say. They are bombarding airports, they are bombarding military, military, even universities, military bases that we have. But they are also just bombarding apartments and houses. For instance, we have a colleague whose house and apartment have burned in this war, and she has 2 children. We have another colleague whose apartment has been also damaged by missiles. So a lot of, it's not just from the press, I know it in reality, that even in my house, in the area in the western suburb of Kiev, I follow the chat of neighbors on Viber, and they post tanks, and they post also this military men running in the forest with flashlights at night, and they just go with guns and try to protect the houses and the territory. So there is indeed civilian objects are heavily damaged and they're being attacked, and I think it is not acceptable. It shouldn't be happening.
I think Putin is a tremendous strategist. He's very focused, and he to my mind, he is not erratic. He's very clear, and in fact, every time he has very clearly brought out what he wants. Of course, there are no scruples in achieving his objective, and what he wants to bring Russia into a powerful country on this planet. Is very focused on that. There is no doubt about it. To my opinion, I don't think he's erratic. I keep reading about him, but one can never say. As far as bombing hospitals and all is concerned, we have a similar problem in Kashmir. Now, in Kashmir, the Indian Army faces terrorism. And the rule of the law is, unless you see a gun in that guy's hand, you can do nothing about it. So you can hide the AK-47 in your dress and go about it, until he pulls out and shoots you, and you can do nothing about it because the court will crucify you. So, so how do you identify a soldier, a terrorist from a civilian? That is one. So at times civilians get killed. As far as what I read in the press about Ukraine is, every civilian has been armed. The NATO has pumped weapons into Ukraine and has given it to everybody. Now he has a rifle in his hand. He may be a civilian, not in combat fatigues, or he could be a soldier. Now, if you kill a guy not in combat fatigues, you killed a civilian. If you kill a guy in fatigues, he is a soldier. We have the same problem in Kashmir, and so many of our soldiers have been taken to court, saying that you have killed a civilian. He says, how do I know? Is he going to announce before he shoots that he's a civilian? So this dichotomy exists. And when everybody is armed in Ukraine, this will happen. And like Anastasiia said, the hospital is evacuated and it has been occupied by armed civilians. So it is possible. You see, in today's war, it's unlike what happened in Second World War. We did carpet bombing. We never knew the accuracy of a bomb. So if you wanted to bomb an area, you dropped 100 bombs on it. Today, one bomb is enough because we have precision weapons. We have precision avionics. So we can hit within 3 meters. It's that accurate. So, the devastation as a whole, in today's air power, we don't do that. We are precise. All air forces. As an Air Force pilot, I'm telling you, we are very precise. Exactly which window of that building you want to hit, we can hit. But it was not so 50 years ago. You see? So, area bombing as such is something which we don't adopt anywhere in the world as of now. Nobody, even in Vietnam, they did it. Vietnam, they dropped 1 million tons of bombs and carpeted Vietnam. Ever since then, it didn't happen. It was precise because precision weapons came into being.
Well, thank you so much for that. And unfortunately, with that, we're at the end of our time. Just wanted to take this opportunity to thank both Air Marshal as well as Anastasiia. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective and kind of making what we're hearing and reading about in the newspapers so much more real. Obviously, Anastasiia, please do share us your link again for how we can help for those who are suffering. We'd be happy to circulate that and see how we can support. Thank you so much. And hope you have a great evening.